Hello and welcome to Insights, an interview series brought to you by NALSAR Centre for Tax Laws and supported by Taxmann. In the first two episodes, we had interviewed Senior Advocate Tarun Gulati from Delhi and Alok Prasanna Kumar from Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy. You can find both the links in the video description. As our third guest, we are pleased to invite Mr. Karan Talwar.
Thank you.
Karan sir is an NALSAR alum from the 2005 batch, in fact, a gold medalist from the NALSAR 2005 batch, and he practices commercial, corporate, and tax laws in Hyderabad. So prior to going independent, he was a partner at Lakshmi Kumar and Shitran as well. So without further ado, so the first thing I wanted to ask you, we've been looking at the campus for a while right now. From your time at NALSA, what are your most fond memories?
Well, firstly, thank you, Anurag, and thank you, NALSAR, for inviting me. There are a lot of fond memories. Um, but I think the best was just to hang out with friends, chill and relax. It's a luxury which we don't really have in today's world where you're busy with the profession, you're busy with your family. I used to love playing table tennis. I remember late into the night in the hostel. And that was one of the sole forms of recreation that we had in the first and second years. Today, of course, we have a lot more infrastructure. Um, I would say just watching movies with friends. Sometimes we were exposed to good cinema in one of our friends, hostel rooms where we'd all watch a good movie together. And of course, there were the great debates, like I'm sure all of you also have, where you're all passionately trying to argue a point, be it in philosophy or politics or whatever. I don't know how right we were, but nevertheless, it was something that I also really enjoyed. Then, of course, the usual. I think you would go to the dhaba, nearby, and I think pretty much what all of you would also have done is what we had also done. And just looking back, it's nice. The fests were a lot of fun. The amount of diversity that we would see in terms of people coming up with, performances or food. For me, it was like an eye opener to see because at that time itself, we had, I think, students from about 25 states. So, yeah, I think a lot of happy memories that I'm grateful for. So, yeah.
We had fest at that time also, like, I mean,
Yeah, we
Awad
are,
Magad.
we had, of course, the Carpe Diem. Then I recall people celebrating the festivals like Onam or, Lodi, and, there were things around that. So maybe we didn't have your Avad Magad and all.
Okay.
But we are not that old also. So.
No,
Yeah.
Carpe Diem were carrying on the tradition very strongly.
Okay.
Other than that, we have like fest, like regional fest. Awad Magar is like UP and Haryana, all those.
All right.
areas. So
All
that we
right.
have region specific fest. Southeast is going to come up very soon.
Okay.
Then you
Okay.
have East Fest, you have Telugu Fest. So
Right.
every weekend is something.
Yeah, I've seen messages on our WhatsApp groups of NALSA students asking for money. And then NALSAR alumni also asking them, but why do they need so much money? We want to talk to them and figure out as to what the budget should be. So, yeah.
So yes, sir. I mean, the main reason we wanted to talk to you and learn about your journey is that, of course, you have a lot of insight into the law and the profession, but we also want to learn from your journey as well. So again, we were discussing this just before the interview, where you had given an interview in 2005 to
Okay.
some reporters who were asking what
Right.
you want to do,
Right.
and you said that I want to enter litigation.
Right.
So I just wanted to ask you, what was your thought process back then? Like, what did you see your career to look like? What made you join Lakshmi Kumar and Sidran? And what was your initial phase at the firm like?
Okay. We start by saying that when I was just about to graduate from law school, one of the messages that I kept receiving from a lot of judges and senior advocates who used to come and visit us was that focus on learning when you first get out of law school, at least for the first 4 or 5 years. And that's a message that really stayed with me. So I decided that I would have an open mind and I would try and experiment within the law as much as I could and get as much diverse exposure. So it was with that kind of a mindset that ultimately, when I stepped out of NALSAR, I actually started life off in the City Civil Court of Hyderabad. A lot of people may not know that. But I spent a few months learning up the procedure there. And on the side, on the weekend, I used to, in fact, on Saturdays, go and work in a chartered accountancy firm where I would assist them by looking up their income tax matters which were pending before the quasi-judicial authorities or before the ITA. And so I had a lot of learning there as well. But after a few months, I sort of got impatient and I said, okay, I may be learning a lot of procedure here, but I'm really missing out on substantive law learning because there's a lot of Order 9, Rule 7 kind of applications, restoration applications, minor Order 39 rule applications. Maybe in retrospect, I should have perhaps continued a little more, but I didn't. I then moved on to Delhi and I joined Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan after a few months. But then also I started off in the indirect tax team, and they also had certain specializations within indirect tax. They had separate teams for central excise, customs, and service tax as it was evolving at that time. In addition to, of course, their IP practices and international trade. So I was with their central excise team for about a year, and I got great exposure. I was allowed to go to the Supreme Court, to the High Courts. I was, in fact, given small matters to argue in the CSTAT at a very young age. So they were very encouraging that way. But then again, I felt after a year that I'd like to diversify and not miss out on the other things, because the advantage of being young and being able to do other things may not be there as you grow older. I joined another firm, which is a mid-sized firm. It was named Premnath Rai Associates. And in fact, Mr. Premnath Rai was a corporate lawyer, and he used to be the number 2 lawyer in a firm named JSA, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And he had started up his own firm. And it was a boutique firm, and I was with them for a couple of years. And I got diverse exposure in a lot of corporate and commercial laws. I worked on transactions, a lot of mid-sized M&A transactions, some of them big also. I worked on a project finance deal. I was involved in a lot of commercial litigation, shareholder disputes, winding up petitions, quash petitions under Section 482 of Criminal Procedure Code, to name a few. So it was in that firm that I really got exposure to a lot of work. I remember even working on, insurance laws because we had a few life insurance clients. So that's where I really got, I think, quite a bit of diverse experience. And I think the experience was invaluable for me when I also set up my own office. After that, having worked in Delhi for a few years, I then came back to Hyderabad for personal reasons. And then destiny and a dear friend, in fact, got me back into Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan when I joined their Hyderabad office. And the funny thing is that when I joined them back in, I think, 2010, they asked me to set up the corporate practice for them. They were very well known for taxes, international trade, and IP. And I was only 5 years in the profession, and I took that on as a very interesting opportunity. Because, to be very honest, I was also extremely scared. So being only 5 years in the profession, to lead a corporate practice in a growing city is very difficult. But I did so, and slowly we built a team. We had then finally a team of about 5 people before I left them, dedicated for doing corporate and commercial law work. I also got to do during that time a lot of income tax work and a lot of IP litigation. So I was grateful for that kind of an opportunity. In about 3 years or so, midway into being with them in Hyderabad, the tax partner wanted to move back to Chennai, because he was originally from there. And that's when I then started spearheading both teams. And because I had prior tax experience in any case, so that's when I started looking after their entire practice in Hyderabad till I left them in 2017 and then started my practice. So it's a journey somewhat guided by, of course, my aspirations and also my circumstances, because you can't really script all of this. If students believe that they'll be sort of able to script their entire career, I think they'll find many doors that close for them and other doors that open for them. So this has been the journey. And then, of course, I now have my own practice. I've been running it for about 6 years. where again we do a lot of tax work and other corporate and commercial work.
Yes, sir. On this point, this is something that a lot of students keep thinking about. If I had to give you an example, some student in second or third year would do some IPR move.
Mhm.
They do the move, they like it, and they decide I'm going to be an IPR lawyer for life.
Okay.
So there's everybody feels like as quickly as possible we must specialize, and they feel it'll give a career boost. So how do you see this generalization versus specialization debate, at least in tax? Because at least from whatever we keep hearing, a lot of people say that direct tax is completely different. Like a direct tax lawyer cannot do indirect tax, an indirect tax lawyer cannot do anything in corporate. But since you have background in all of these areas, how would you view this generalization versus specialization issue in law?
Well, firstly, I think it depends on your personality type. Uh, if you're someone who's more inclined to a specialized role, I think that's also fine. You can start by specializing in whichever area that you really want to. I'll only have a caveat that maybe at least if you can spend 1 or 2 years doing some general law work, that would be good. But if not, also, given the architecture of law firms today, law practices today, where there's a great emphasis on specialization, that does happen. Right from day one, you are into a super specialized area. You spoke of taxes and IP. I mean, even within direct taxes, there are people who specialize only in international taxes. In IP, there are people who will only specialize in patents or will only specialize in trademark and copyright. So we do have this kind of a divide that does come. But then there are also some lawyers I have seen who have been able to sort of juggle doing different practice areas. But what does tend to happen is that ultimately you'll tend to sort of specialize in 1 or 2 areas. It's sort of difficult in today's world to be a very generalist lawyer doing everything. We have a few senior counsels, of course, who sort of are engaged and are able to do a wide variety of matters. But then that is sometimes on a small or a short point of law that they'll come and argue it based on a briefing by briefing counsel. And there are very few of them, I would say. And it used to be in the past like that, but the era of specialization is coming about. I would still say that yeah, you may not be confined to just one super specialized area, but you can sort of juggle between two and three. I think it is possible, even in today's world, no matter what the competition may be. Um, See, one is also a product of their environment. If you are in a city today, there is a very sophisticated legal market like, say, Delhi or Bombay, then specializations are far more. And it's extremely competitive in those kind of jurisdictions. But in places maybe like Hyderabad or in the other growing cities of India, I think maybe like a Bhopal or, Ahmedabad or whatever. So in those kind of places, I still think that you can probably juggle a lot more. So now when it comes to direct taxes and indirect taxes and not being able to cross over, the reason for that is similar. In direct taxes also in these jurisdictions like Bombay and Delhi especially is very, very competitive. Now firms that hire lawyers also would like to build efficient teams, and nothing wrong with that. So they'll expect you from day one to do only that particular area which you've been hired for. But there are people who have been able to manage the two. But I can tell you it's very tough. It's not easy at all. It involves a lot of hard work. So you will sacrifice a lot of personal time if you are trying to be good at both.
So, sir, I mean, continuing this whole generalist versus specialist thing, what do you think are some of the skill sets, knowledge, or anything of that sort, which kind of stays constant throughout any area of law? For example, we are always told that you must be good at drafting. Like a lot of the advice most people give is that first get good at drafting, get good at cross examination, then think about specialist. So, in your view, how would you see those common set of skills that apply to all areas of law? Are there any such things?
Look, ultimately, you have to be a good lawyer.
Hmm.
So unless the fundamentals are strong, you'll never be able to become a good tax lawyer or any kind of specialist lawyer.
Hmm.
So all the things that you mentioned, like drafting, cross examination is for more someone who wants to be a litigating lawyer.
Hmm.
But drafting, statutory interpretation, basic concepts of law being clear, you updating yourself all the time. These are basics. Unless you have them, anyways, you can never be a good lawyer. Now, also, I don't think you can compartmentalize them and say first get good at drafting, then get good at the law. No, all of this has to sort of travel together,
Hmm.
especially the first few years. So the way I would break it up is that you see, and I was also advised this. The most time that you have as a lawyer to learn your craft probably is before you settle down and get married. It's when you have the most time. And it's at that time, the first 5 or 6 years of your career, that you focus on each of these things. Each of these is non negotiable. Be it the drafting, be it the research, be it the reading, be it the exposure that you get, and you have to work under a good mentor. I think blessed are those who get good mentors. Many lawyers sometimes don't get that. And your mentor is the one who's going to guide you at each step of the way. It'll be difficult for a young lawyer to envision how he's going to get good at each of these things. You don't learn all of that in law school. A good guide will tell you that these are the steps to take. So I would say that identifying good mentors when you start out your careers is the most important.
So, sir, on this mentor's point also, this is something that even I think about a lot. How do you pick a right mentor? Like, is it luck driven that you happen to come across a really good boss, or what can you do? For example, I hope you're going to be my mentor for a time. So that way I got lucky. But if somebody wants to look forward for a mentor, how do you identify who is a good mentor for you in the profession?
The, the you hear about in the profession from your fellow students or your immediate seniors as to who are the good lawyers. Feedback does come through. When you join in a big law firm, for example, it may be difficult to choose your mentor because they will allocate you, to a particular partner. You may not really have much of a choice. But when it comes to, I think, smaller practices, boutique practices, or individual lawyers, then of course you can always hear about those lawyers, find out about those lawyers, and then apply to them and try and work under them. It's also a combination of luck, but I don't think it's only luck. You can definitely try and do internships with people you feel are good, explore, and then I think ultimately, if you're really searching for a good mentor and you're sincere about it, and you're good at the work that you do, then even mentors look for good people.
Hmm.
You see, I think a good mentor also enjoys the process of mentoring. There's a lot of learning that they also get when they mentor good youngsters. When I have mentored youngsters, I have found that a lot of good points come from them, which I would never have thought of. So it's a sort of a search where yes, you have to find the right guru, be in sync with that guru, and you can find them. I don't think you can read up their interviews. Today you have the advantage of live streaming of so many court proceedings. You can see how they argue in court. But what you must also realize is that all mentors are human. They will have, their strengths and weaknesses, and you'll have to sort of live with that. You're not going to get a perfect, mentor in that sense, but you'll find good mentors.
Okay. Lot to think about, but so those are the questions basically about your journey. And we were hoping to ask you some questions about tax practice also in specific.
Right.
So in particular, we had some questions about GST. Now it's been approximately 7 years that GST came. 2016 it came, and it's
2017,
been 2017.
July 17.
5 to 7 years has elapsed. And when GST came, there was of course huge amount of litigation because of the transitory provisions, and it's a complete overhaul of the indirect tax system. So I just wanted to ask you, since you've been practicing for more than a decade now, what are some of the similarities and differences on a structural level in indirect tax litigation before GST and after GST? Like, are there any similarities or differences between the two?
Well, fundamentally, tax disputes will remain the same, but what we have found is, uh, indirect taxes was spread across a variety of different tax laws, right? So the taxable events were very, very different. In the pre-GST regime, you had excise on manufacture, you had service tax on services, you had VAT on sale of goods, you had entry taxes, you had luxury taxes, you had, so you had a wide variety of taxable events. And some of that litigation still, of course, continues today because it has to still be resolved by the High Court and the Supreme Court. Now, with the onset of GST, I think the first radical change that we have seen is this 101st constitutional amendment. So now we're at the cusp of a redistribution of legislative powers that has come in. And this redistribution of legislative powers has already led to a lot of litigation as to what the scope of the powers of the states are for the center. We've already seen that celebrated decision of Union of India versus Mohit Minerals, where they looked at whether GST Council recommendations are binding or not. And there are a lot of disputes as to whether the states could legislate, for example, after the 101st Amendment came, but for the period prior to the onset of GST. So all of that is also now pending in the Supreme Court. A couple of high courts have already passed decisions or judgments on that. The other change that I noticed, as I was in fact telling you before, is that today you have the minutes of the meetings of the GST Council. See, with the onset of the GST Council and this concept of pooled sovereignty, we are seeing a lot of discussions between the states before any new law is sort of brought into play. So that helps us give a lot of insight into what the background for these laws is, especially when we are looking to either interpret the laws as they stand today or challenge them as it stands today. So that itself is also something which is very different from what we used to see in the pre-GST regime, where we would be searching for what are the real reasons behind the passing of a new law. The statement of objects and reasons would be very, very short. You really don't get much of an idea. Now it's really fleshed out in the GST Council. So these are some of the kinds of changes that have come about. The other thing is today, GST is a new law. It's got remnants of the erstwhile indirect tax laws which are also there. We also see things borrowed from other countries. So since it's a sort of a novel law in that sense, there is a tremendous amount of interpretation that's going on as to what's the true meaning of some of these provisions or the exemptions. There's also a plethora of constitutional challenges on so many of the provisions. We have seen it on the input tax credit provisions. We are seeing it in the context of valuation. We're seeing it in the context of arrest. And even detention provisions have been constitutionally challenged. So all of that is now going to come about, over the next few years. So given the new law that it is, I think these are some of the very, very important changes that are going to come about. And we might also see disputes between states themselves as to who has the jurisdiction to tax particular transactions. So that's also going to be something new, in a sense, that especially when it comes to place of supply provisions, for example. So that's probably also going to be something very, very different in the GST regime.
So you mentioned that GST again is still a new law. You mentioned that it has remnants of the past as well as we borrowed from experiences of other countries.
Correct.
So, sir, something which we noticed as students also, at least when it comes to income tax, some fundamental concepts remain similar across jurisdictions. For example, look at your DTA itself.
Right.
The DTAs are fairly standardized, and you can, let's say, understand foreign judgments slightly better because the same concepts of residence, poem, and all that.
Right.
But for GST, when we start looking at other countries' indirect taxation, they seem very different. Like it's difficult to wrap your head around it actually. So, have you ever come across, for example, comparative research in indirect tax? And how do you approach trying to understand some other jurisdictions, indirect taxation? What are some of the basic principles that one must learn before understanding how other countries approach indirect taxation?
You see, now I don't know if your experience has been that a lot of the GST laws are very different in other countries, but I think the basic concept of supply is at least largely similar in UK, Australia, and New Zealand. When you look at the concept of supply and its taxability, I think the jurisprudence of those countries is quite relevant. When it comes to input tax credit, yes, I think we have more of a regime that is borrowed from the past, customized. It's a mixture of what we saw in the SENVAT credit regime and what we saw in the VAT regime. So for that, I would rather look to the Indian jurisprudence in the past, but I may not look so much to what the law was over there in the other countries. So things like valuation also You see, valuation is also a bit of a mix and match. It's a combination of what we saw to some extent in central excise. Somewhat it's been sort of modified over here. So there also, yes, uh, I would look more at the past laws. But there are complications that arise. For example, in barters, where you have two supplies being made and how you would value them. Then there are some general concepts which I think uh, you can look at the foreign jurisprudence a lot in, and you'll find them. Australia, for example, is a very good jurisdiction to look at because you'll see a lot of their tax rulings given out in advances. These comprehensive circulars that really explain the legal position. Even UK to some extent. So I would say it's a bit of a mix and match when you look at the jurisprudence. You may not find everything there, and thankfully so. I mean, we don't need to really borrow everything from there. But certainly you will find rich jurisprudence and very relevant jurisprudence when it comes to taxability and the concept of supply. So that is how I would approach.
So, sir, I mean, when it comes to indirect tax practice, right now we still don't have a GST tribunal set up, right?
Right.
So, in case a tribunal set up, how do you see it? Would it have any impact on the profession, on the amount of litigation that takes place? And somebody who wants to enter indirect tax right now, for example, can you provide any sort of an outlook of what the next 5 to 10 years in this area would look like?
Okay. The tribunal is something that has been long awaited. And in the absence of the tribunal, whenever we've had, the appellate authorities pass orders, we are all going directly to the High Court. So a lot of those matters are pending there. And there's also been a relaxation of limitation for filing appeals because the tribunal is not in existence. So some people have kept the matters pending and have not traveled to the tribunal as of yet. But I do feel that once the tribunal is formed, there's going to be a lot of litigation that's going to come about because all these matters which are probably today in the High Court, let's say the tribunal comes up, hopefully say in a year or two, I mean they've brought in a new section 109 just yesterday, which deals with the GST Tribunal. Once the tribunal is formed, we are going to see a lot of these matters come back from the High Court, I think, which are pending over there, and also a lot of new matters. Now, in fact, in GST, if you ask me, a lot of the assessments for even 17, 18 have not really been completed. Especially where, the extended period of limitation, as we call it, may be invoked, where there are allegations of suppression or fraud against the assessment. So, there still is time, and those orders have really yet to be passed. What we are seeing today are a few orders on refunds. We see a lot of fake invoice kind of cases. Few cases on assessments have been done. But still, it really hasn't begun, in my view, in a big way. So, I think once the tribunal is formed, and once these assessments, at least of 17, 18, kick off, we are going to see a lot of litigation. Now, with the onset of any new law, there's going to be a lot of litigation till the issues settle down. And in that sense, I think the first few assessment years, till those issues get resolved for them, is going to be a lot of litigation. And if you look at the way the GST Council has also been working in terms of amending the laws, some of them, clarifications have come which are retrospective in nature and all of those, and they've been coming even till today. So all that churning has to happen ultimately in a court of law. And very frankly, it really has to happen in the tribunal because the tribunal truly is the last fact-finding authority. The high courts and the Supreme Courts may at best deal with, writ petitions on natural justice violations or where there is an order passed without jurisdiction or the constitutional challenges. But all of this has to be fleshed out only at the tribunal.
So, sir, I mean, there's one, the High Court. Second is the potential tribunal. And there's also the authority for advance rulings, right?
Right.
So, how does appearing before these three courts differ fundamentally, or is more or less the same, like the kind of approach you take for each of the authorities?
You see, the authority for advance rulings or the appellate authority for advance rulings, for that matter, they are ultimately like quasi-judicial authority. So, you don't, of course, have a courtroom ambience or something like that. But you have officers who are, of course, well trained in the law. The senior
Hmm.
officers who really complies the AAR or the AAR. So it's more like you can very neatly explain the position of law. But we have found from experience that a lot of the orders that have come from there have been negative.
Hmm.
A few have been positive, but mostly it has been negative. So I would say that, of course, it's not like a court of law itself. The tribunal is going to comprise of judicial members and state members. Now, a tribunal is more like a courtroom environment, I would say, where there really is a lot of argument by the assessee's representative and the departmental representative. And generally, tribunal members would also be well versed with the law, but we find from experience that they would be more judicious and more neutral.
Hmm.
And as it is for young lawyers, I would say it's also a great learning ground, because that's where you'll really see all the points being fleshed out and opportunities to argue from. High courts, of course, typically will deal only with substantial questions of law. They are not really going to rehear questions of fact, and that's where now the legal point would be crystallized. And of course, the emphasis on the correct legal principle and the correct jurisprudence would be a lot more in the high court. You see a lot more advocacy happening and a lot more fleshing out of the point, because some high court judges would be well versed with tax and some would not be that well versed with tax. So yeah, I think that's how it would be.
So, in your opinion, over the next 5-10 years, if a tribunal is set up, we might see the High Court finally getting matters on merits,
Right.
where they settle disputes and not just focus on your interim orders.
Correct.
That sounds good for people who are entering in
There's a
direct
lot
tax.
of scope, certainly, for the next few years once the assessment starts. There's a lot of litigation you'll find. Maybe I cannot predict with exactitude, but at least for the next 10 to 20 years, I think there'll be a lot of litigation. Because all of this litigation has to travel up right from quasi judicial authorities to the tribunal, then to the High Court, and then ultimately to the Supreme
Hmm. So, sir, I think we're running short on time. There's just one last question that I want to ask. So, I think aside from organizing fests and enjoying Carpe Diem, we do have a lot of free time generally on campus. And
Court. Okay.
a lot of people in third year also, some of them are here and they want to specialize in taxation right now. So, in general, irrespective of whether you want to specialize in tax or not, I just want to ask you, if you had to go back in time and if there's something that you wish to spend more time on at NALSAR, what would that be? Where, any skill that you want to develop at that time or anything of that sort. So, what do you think would be something you would do differently if you were at NALSAR?
That's a good question, actually. I would say one thing I realized is that people who want to specialize in tax try and focus a lot more on reading up this tax law. But tax laws have an interplay with a wide variety of laws. If you're working on an issue of taxation of HUF, you need to know about your Hindu law, which you would have learnt in your family law course. If you're looking at the Benami Prohibition Act, for example, you need to be very, very grounded in your principles of trust law, because those come into play. Even when you are looking at commercial transactions, contract law is very important. Company law is also extremely important for a tax lawyer. Somebody asked me the difference the other day between a bond and a debenture. And when I look at the definition of debentures under company law, they say debenture includes bonds. When I look at Black's Law Dictionary, bonds are like debentures. And these is all circular reasoning. What truly is the difference? So uh, I would like to emphasize that uh, knowing the concepts and basics in each of the general areas of law is extremely important for a tax. Now, why do I also say this in a day? You see, in the market, in the profession, you have a lot of tax lawyers. You also have a lot of chartered accountants. You also have a lot of cost and management accountants. And all of them are in this field of tax law, who are practicing. The chartered accountants and the CMAs bring with them a lot of accounting knowledge. The tax lawyers, I would say, are supposed to bring their knowledge of legal principle and jurisprudence to the table. That's the value add that they'll bring, because both of these professionals or three of these professionals all will know the basics of tax law. So it's important for tax lawyers to be very, very strong on principle. And therefore, if you want to be a very, very good tax lawyer, I would say, in addition to sort of reading up more on tax laws on the side because it's an area of interest, don't lose sight of these basic principles and keep focusing on them as well. You will find that to be very, very, very important. The other thing, okay, I did not really do any diploma in tax or something like that. Perhaps if there was a good course that I could have done on the side, I think that would also have been very, very useful. But then, I mean, there's only so much you can do when you're in college. You're anyways going to keep working all throughout your life. So it's also some way where you are grooming yourself as a person. So I think even if I didn't do it, it may not be so bad. But yeah, if I had the spare time, I think that would also have been, and especially in something like maybe international taxation or something like that.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for taking out the
Thank
time.
you.
I
Thank
hope
you so
we
much.
can look forward to your mentorship and some financial contribution for our fest also. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, Anurag.